Today's guest is Dr. Kimberly Lemke. She's a dear friend. She's founder and CEO of Drift. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She's a certified sleep science coach. She's got so much to offer us today, not just about entrepreneurship, but about sleep. Who doesn't love the conversation about sleep? She's got some really practical tips on how to sleep better. Stay tuned. The Nothing Else Mattress Show starts now. When we started out, it was just about providing for our families while being in the driver's seat of our careers. I started in the mattress industry in 1999, and when I left the corporate world and Joe and I opened the Big Mattress Outlet in 2012, we could never have dreamed how rewarding business ownership would be for us.
My only regret is that we didn't do this sooner. I was terrified to make that jump, to leave the comfort of the corporate environment. As the old saying goes, I can promise you, parachute's never going to open if you first don't jump.
We've built a proven business model that's unique in the industry. It's profitable year after year, even through fluctuating markets and economies. We want to work with like-minded entrepreneurs who, like us, don't mind a little hard work, but want to own something that goes beyond just providing for our families financially. It offers exponential growth and profit opportunity, not to mention just a great culture and a really fun industry.
If you think you might be a fit, we'd love to talk to you.
Today's guest is so special. My new friend, Dr. Kimberly Lemke. Kimberly, we met several months ago. We've kindled a friendship that is just so rewarding. Kimberly is passionate about what she does. She is the founder and CEO of Drift. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, and she is a certified sleep science coach. She has so much to share with us. Dr. Lemke, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me, sweet friend. I can't wait to do this with you.
Well, so much to talk about. We're just not going to be able to fit it into a show. But so much of what you do, you are a sleep science coach, you're a licensed clinical psychologist, you're an entrepreneur. But I want to talk first about your entrepreneurial journey, because I am so intrigued. When I was reading some articles and interviews with you, some of this, I was so relatable. I was like, the fears and the way you were vulnerable about the feelings of starting a business and launching on your own. I think so many people can relate to that. Just can take us back to where you started there and kind of walk us through how you got started, what it felt like, kind of give us the overall view of how you got where you are.
Yeah. So way back when, I always tell the story of, I was about 4 years old, and I actually didn't learn about the story until later, but I was lining up Barbies on the couch and asking them how they felt at 4. And so, my mom didn't share the story with me until later in my life. And she was like, I think this is what you were always meant to do, And so I just really started on this journey of, I just loved connecting with people. And so went into high school and college, and then eventually grad school, and got my doctorate in psychology. And really, I sort of see my mission as, I always say, I sort of walk with people in their darkness, and we both have flashlights, and I just sort of, mine works a little bit better. The batteries are a little bit stronger, right? And so I just sort of shine things and see if they can see it until theirs sort of comes on and works better. And then it's on them to sort of take control. And so that's always been sort of my goal is, how can I help people really become sort of feeling empowered and masterful in their own lives? And so I had gone to school, I had done my residencies, and went and joined a group practice on my own. And I will never forget, I had talked to them about, I had brought in a lot of sort of clients on my own and was doing good work with them. And I was so nervous, right, to sort of stand up for what I believed my worth was. I don't know that we're taught to do that, right? Throughout grad school, you weren't taught to speak business, right? It was just like, okay, you speak science, I spoke psychology, but speaking business, I was like, I don't know how to do this. And so I sat down and had a conversation, and basically at the end of that thought I had to do my own thing, and was terrified. And so ended up leaving that practice and starting my own practice 15 or so years ago, and just continue to be afraid and do it anyway. I think entrepreneur, people are like, do you feel like super secure all the time? I'm like, no. And I don't ever want
Never.
to be. I'm not growing.
Oh, yeah. The fear is something that is so relatable. Like, I know for me, it never stops. I was speaking with another friend on a previous podcast recording, Harry Roberts. I think you know Harry.
Yeah.
And we talked about how, to start with, like, there's like the fear of your own failure, but it's just you. And then as you
Yes.
grow, there's other people that come into your circle, and now they depend on you. And so the fear never goes away. Like, it's, and one thing that I like to say a lot is that it's not courage if you're not afraid.
Oh, I love
So we
that.
talk about having the courage to go out on your own, but it's not courage if there's not, an element of fear in there also.
Yeah.
God, so relatable.
And
So
I think too, like,
you 15 years ago went out on your own. What's that?
I was going to say there's this favorite quote. I have no idea who said it, but it said, "A bird doesn't put its trust in the branches. A bird puts its trust in its wings." And really, that's how I see courage: is what are you putting your trust in? And so, when a bird lands in a new environment, trying something new, its faith is in itself, right? And so that's, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs too, is just to sort of have that faith in yourself and that faith in your strength. And you don't have to have faith in the environment you're going into. You just have to have faith in yourself and your strength to do it.
And the grit and the determination. Just know that. I mean, I saw you quote something, or in one of the things that I read that you had written, that the word fail just means it was the first attempt in learning, because we are going to fail at some things. Like, everything's not going to go perfectly smoothly, but that's how we learn, right?
I did not,
So,
I own that I did not do that well. Like, I learned that lesson way too late in life. And so I absolutely drill that home for my kids, to the point where they're probably so sick of me saying it. But to be honest, I wanted to do things really well when I did them. I didn't want to fail ever. Right. And so I really missed out on doing things because I was more afraid of failing. And I really wasn't until later on, and when I had started Drift, I had it was early on, and I'll never forget this. It's actually on my wall. But I had sent out this email to this organization for the consulting I do, and it was sort of like that first email, right? It was like Drift's first, moment out, right? And so I had sent it out and had a few conversations, and they had responded back and basically said, "At this time, we're not going to go with your services." And I remember looking at the screen, and in that moment, it was a deciding factor. And I knew it based on who I was in the past. And I was either going to take that email and I was going to see it as like, like, we're going to stop. Let me get back into my lane of psychology. And I'm not going to sort of go into this sort of sleep realm or this organizational realm. And I knew that was an option, and it was a strong option. And then the other part with me was like, hey, like, walk the walk. If you're telling your kids, don't be afraid to fail, then you better not be afraid to fail. And so I literally can't see it, but I have a printed out email. It's the only thing on my wall. It was that email that's still there to this day, as a reminder
wow.
of, like, you have choices. And so your choices are, you either proceed with courage while you are failing and falling, right? Or you don't. But I refused at that point to continue doing what I was doing.
And having the faith in yourself that you can see through it, that you'll figure it out. Um, Sometimes we have this vision ahead of us, and we don't plan every single path of the journey because that's impossible. But we know, we've got enough faith in ourselves to know that we can get past the hurdles as they come along. We don't have to know what all the hurdles are going to be and have the answers to all of them to know ourselves, and the
Yes.
determination that we're going to have to figure it out,
Yes.
and surround ourselves maybe with the right people. Or have you had people kind of along the way with you that are like, these relationships have been valuable? And because I find that that's a common thread in every success story, is this surrounding themselves with people that were the right crowd.
Yes. And what do you learn from the wrong crowd when you surround yourself by them too?
Yeah.
Because I think both can happen. And part of it too is when I had just spoken to somebody the other day about this, that the business world, right, is a lot about sort of closing things, right? For salesmen, closing sales, right? Closing deals, closing all that. And I was talking to this individual the other day, and he was like, "You are an expert, like, opener." Right? Like, in terms of, like, you love opening relationships, and like, close, you don't like closing. I'm like, I know, right? Like, what I do for a living literally as a psychologist is
That's
like, how do
good.
we open a relationship? And then I was like, oh my gosh, like, why am I valuing, and I talk about this with organizations and salesmen as well, like, the more you focus on closing, the more you're missing opening the relationship. And once you open that, that's where the power is. That's where the strength is. It's not in the closing, it's in the sort of opening of it.
I'm writing it down in case you see me looking over here because that's really important. It's a double red underline moment right there. Focus on opening and not closing.
Yes.
Opening the relationship. Oh wow, how valuable. So pausing to go back for a second when you 15 years ago when you're like, okay, I'm doing this, I'm going out on my own. I know you said you were terrified, but we kind of skipped over that word and we went on with the rest of the success story because we know you're highly successful and I do want to talk about all that and then I want to get into what you're successful at with the sleep especially because I think that surprisingly to a lot of people listening, maybe you're listening to this from like an entrepreneurial standpoint, but sleep is actually very deeply connected with entrepreneurship. So we're going to get into that. But I want to focus first on that moment because I think it's a really valuable conversation of, the terrified part, the, the decision to do it and what made you actually just make the jump and say, okay, I'm going to try this.
So I'm a huge fan of integrity, right? And to me, it's sort of like, who are you when nobody is looking? And I felt like in a few of the environments that I had to be in, whether it was some of the clinical rotations that I had to be a part of and then eventually leave, or this sort of other organization, I didn't feel like I was living in my integrity. And the farther I felt away from who I am, the worse I felt about me. Like, it affected my mood. I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't happy. And so I really had to look at that and walk the walk and just say, like, hey, if I'm going to live in my integrity, if I really want control, right, over how things flow in a sense, right? If I really want control over the environment that I try to create or the relationships I try to create, I have to be uncomfortable now because I was already uncomfortable, right? It's like, choose your discomfort. I'm either going to be uncomfortable not standing in my integrity, or I'm going to be uncomfortable doing something I'm terrified of doing. So either way, I was going to be uncomfortable. And I had to choose which discomfort meant more to me. And at that point, and I think within my sort of soul's human being part, it's that integrity piece. It's be genuinely who you are and that one. And so I thought, I can take on the discomfort of fear and failure because I didn't want that other discomfort anymore.
God, I love that so much. Choose your discomfort. Because, I say a lot like, entrepreneurship's not about working less. That's something you hear me say over and over again, because if you've had a measure of success as a business owner, it's not about working less. A lot of times it's about working harder, but it's just working different. So now you kind of bring this point in of like discomfort. It's choose your discomfort. You can be uncomfortable in an environment where you feel like you're not being true to yourself because you're not being able to fulfill who you are inside, or you can choose the discomfort of the unknown, being out on your own. So you made your choice. And then you had a couple of failures there, like you mentioned, the email, the rejection letter. So you posted that on the wall and now that's your like inspiration, like, don't tell me.
Exactly. My daughter still comes in. She's like, why do we still have this on the wall? And I said, because I never want to forget that moment. I never want to forget that moment because every day I'm making the choice that I made that day. Every day, right? When things are hard, when things are tough, every day it's that, right? And so it's just in a different capacity, right? It's choosing hard. And that to me, that's what that symbolizes is choose hard. And whether that's me being a parent at times
And,
or whether it doesn't matter.
yeah, and you're a mom, so that alone is hard. And so you're juggling being a single mom and then being an entrepreneur. You don't want to let your kids down, and we all have this mom guilt. Can we talk about mom guilt for a second? My kids are grown, but I'm all too familiar with the mom guilt.
It's big. It's a thing.
Yes, it is. All right, Dr. Psychologist, let's talk about let's dissect this. But I think that's really important because a lot of our entrepreneurial people who may be listening might be females with, and not that dads don't feel it. I'm not saying that, but a lot of times moms fill a different role, and to step out on your own there's an element of guilt, especially if you start succeeding.
Yes.
Like, because it takes time and effort and work. And so, talk about that for a minute, what it feels like, and why it's okay to be a success and be a mom at the same time.
I I really have to look at sort of values, for myself, and even when I talk to people about this who struggle with it, to me, you really have to balance and look at what you value, right? I value time with my kids. I value going to their sporting events. I value sitting down with them and helping them with their homework. I don't value cooking a healthy meal or knowing how to cook it. I mean, I'll give them a healthy meal, but like it's definitely not like a 5 star, right? Because it's not my value, right? Like, and they don't want it. It's nothing about the meal I
Yeah,
present is going to be good, right? Like,
they really have the chicken nuggets anyway.
100%, exactly. I was like, you get your fruit and veggies and all that will be on there, but it's not going to be pretty. And so, right, I sort of have to look at that and say, okay, well then, right, if I have some stuff to do, then maybe I'm going to do it during that time, right? But I'm not going to take away from, bedtime, and I'm not going to take away from helping them with their homework because I value those. And so it's sort of that idea of, and I value and I adore my business, right? And I value what I do. And so I really have to look at how can they complement each other. And at the end of the day, valuing my role as their mother is my priority. It really is. It 100% is who I want to be, is somebody in their life who they can look up to, somebody who they can look back and say, mom went to every game and mom did all this stuff. And so I really work hard to make that happen. But each person, I think, has their own values, right? Each person has to look at it
Right.
and say, right, this doesn't matter to me, this matters to me. And there's no judgment in it, right? Whatever anybody values is fine.
Right.
But I think the farther you get away from what you truly value, then that becomes an issue.
No, I think that you're so right in the values. I've talked before about staying at a certain size in our big mattress outlet business because we still had children at home and we didn't want to miss those ball games and those vacations and the things that we did, time with the kids, because you can never get that time back. And now that they're grown and gone, I don't have that regret. We were
Yes.
able to balance the work and the business, and it filled a a practical place in our life in that it paid the bills and it kept food on the table and we had a measure of success, but we could still prioritize time with the children because that to us was
Yeah.
most important, also time with the family. And
Right.
now that the kids are grown and gone, we can now use that time a little bit more to expand the business, which is what we're doing. Yeah, and then that goes back there to being true to yourself too, because you talked about the integrity. These are important values to you, so you
Yes.
can negate some of that guilt by sticking true to what's important to you, not letting other things interfere.
And I think if I'm being again sort of genuinely honest, right, as a single mom, there's this other component of the family come 100% dependent on me, right? Like in terms of, right, paying for any bill, right, is dependent on me, right? And so would it be great to be able to be like, nah, like I'll get to my business when I can get to my business and spend all the time with my kids? Like, yes, that'd be great. It's just not a reality. And I think it's not a reality for many people. And so then we sort of
Yeah,
beat
right.
ourselves up over it. And we have to look at, hey, there's a basic need of being able to take care of your family too, right? And so people who have to sort of sacrifice that, that's okay too, right? That the shame that sometimes hits, I think, single parents or parents in general is huge. And so just to sort of look at it and give ourselves grace and forgiveness and say sometimes we have to make this choice even though we'd want to make that choice, but do it with sort of grace and love and forgiveness rather than like a you should do this or you should do this or you shouldn't be doing this. I think too much of the world sends us messages of what kind of parent we should be, what kind of mom we should be, what kind of dad we should be, what kind of entrepreneur we should be. And I think we lose touch of that, and we just tend to beat ourselves up more than support ourselves.
And we see other people from outside the jar. We read the label from outside the jar, so we see what they show us, and so sometimes we compare ourselves to something that's not necessarily even accurate.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's the foundation for some guilt sometimes, is that we think somebody else has it all together. They're doing all the things and they've got it all figured out. And then we compare ourselves to what we think we know. And really, we just don't even know what else is going on inside the jar.
Yes. And I have a blessing in that, right? As a clinical psychologist, when I'm working with people one on one, I know because they'll tell me what they're posting, but I know the reality of what's going on, right? And so I see it day in and day out, right? The family looks like they have it all together and they don't, right? The mom who, from to an outside perspective would look like, wow, like she made all these little bento boxes for lunches, right?
Yeah.
But I know like it took her everything to get out of bed because she's been depressed and right, like so, but people don't put that out there. It's the highlight reel of life. And so the more authentic and vulnerable I think we are as entrepreneurs, as people, as, women, as parents, I just think the more vulnerable we can be and authentic, just the better it is for all of us to feel not alone in life.
I agree. And that's why you hear a lot in our podcast here that I try to pull that out of the friends that join me here on the podcast, because people do relate more with our vulnerabilities, because the things that we feel are things everyone is feeling. It's just a matter if we're talking about them or not. And so if we can inspire someone who is thinking of taking that leap of faith that you've done, that I've done, that countless others have done, and they can hear the real raw emotion that was behind it, the fear, and see how we kind of gritted our teeth and dug our heels in and plowed right through it despite obstacles, it's a lot more realistic than just saying, oh, well, I left my job here and I started this company and it's been wildly successful and you should do that too.
Yeah.
That's not relatable. Not how it works.
No. And I just appreciate you, Kelly, sort of bringing this idea, bringing people in, the industry authentically into your podcast and allowing them to be authentic and send this message, and that it's not just a you should do that or you should do that. It's people being people. So I just want you to know I appreciate you allowing your guests to be able to be that too.
Well, I appreciate that, because I think that's super important. I know, had I had sort of a mentor that spoke to me in that way, I might would have progressed a little bit more quickly into business ownership. I just got stubborn and one day just said, all right, I'm doing this now. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to make it work.
Love it.
But I try to be what I wish I might have had access to. And then, I'm a part of a mastermind and we've made some dear friends there, and in some circles where we're really inspiring one another. And we're finding that the inspiration comes from those moments of vulnerability, not the success stories, because all of us in the group have had a measure of success. Like, we're not measuring that against one another. But when we start talking about, maybe opening up a little bit more, in a room where it's a safe place to do so, it's like that's where the real breakthroughs happen. And you said something else in one of the things I wrote that, you were quoting Neil Donald Walsh said, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. But how have you found that to be true?
First of all, I hate that it's accurate, right? Like I just wish I could just, it'd be great to just feel comfortable, all the time in theory, right? But it just keeps showing up as like that's not the way it's gonna go. And maybe for some people, right? I feel like this is not my journey.
They're not being honest if it is. They're making the rosy posts on social media. They're not making the real life posts.
No, oh, that is so true. It is, up and down and up and down, constantly. So right, but I think as people, we want to be comfortable. I mean, who doesn't, right? I just think that why would we choose discomfort? It honestly doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it makes zero sense. So it has to be a conscious choice, right? And I think that's where people struggle, is like, there's always this like, well, I'll know when. And it's like, no, just do it. Just do it. Like,
No,
you
won't.
honestly will never get to a point where it's like, you know what I really want to do right now is I really want to be uncomfortable. Like, I honestly don't know in my career that I've ever said those words, right? It's just like, it's go time. To your point of like, we're doing it, right? And so as opposed to like waiting to feel comfortable in doing it, just, you go out and you take a step and you hope that there is, a platform there to step on, and faith-wise, you hope there's something there to catch you. And I've never found it to not be true.
Yeah. Things, cool things don't start happening until you kind of push past that, the comfort zone. I mean, it's kind of a cliche. We talk about comfort zone, but it's that for a reason. It's because we're not making anything happen. We live in this little comfort zone. But having had now a business for a number of years, I know you have for 15 years. We've had our stores for, we opened in 2012. So as of now, we're at 12 years into our stores. And, if we had stayed in a comfort zone, we would not have grown.
Yeah.
Could we have survived there? Absolutely, we could have. That could have paid the bills. We could have had a nice, and if that's what a person wants, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If that's a value that's dear to them, but if what you want of your success is to grow into some either bigger position or grow a company or something, you have to change, and change is what's scary
Yes.
because the world we live in changes, the consumers we service change, everything changes, and if you don't kind of be proactive and change with it, then you aren't going to grow.
Yes. I don't know if you've ever seen, I'm going to date myself here, but like Friends. Some people might not know
Of
what Friends
course,
is.
every episode 3 times.
It's so good. Like I watched Friends when like you couldn't like you had to record it if you were gonna miss it, right? So there's this scene where I don't know if you remember, like Ross, they would bring a couch downstairs or something, and he was like pivot,
Oh
sometimes
yeah,
fall, you know.
yeah, yeah.
And I hear
Famous
that
scene.
in my head constantly. There's something about the word change that freaks people out, but pivoting sounds less. Right? Like, I'm not going to change. I'm just going to pivot. And people are like, oh, I can pivot. But it's the same exact
Yeah,
thing. I just think the word change terrifies people. So I tell people we're actually not going to change anything. We're just going to pivot. And they're
we're
like,
just
oh,
gonna
okay.
pivot.
How
No, I love that. I love that.
pivoting?
So I'll
Pivoting.
date myself too. The first episode of Friends, I specifically remember the first episode I ever watched was when I was in the hospital having given birth to my son, who is now 29. And that we were just scrolling through the channels and paused on that because it looked like it might be a mildly amusing show. And by the end of it, I was like, I love this show. When is the next one going to air? What is this show? Somebody write that down. I want to watch it again. But that was Friends back in 1995.
I love that so much. It's good. It's still good. It's still good.
It's
And
still great. But no, I can picture the scene where pivot, Ross is like, you're not pivoting. Yeah, as a matter of fact, in the office that the podcast is recorded in, here on the other side of the wall in front of me is a landing at the top of a stairway, and we brought some furniture up for our conference area that we now use for our company meetings. And so one of the items was a sofa. And so when you get to the top of the landing, the ceiling is really low, but there's like a half wall there. So it's a very precise way that you have to move the sofa like around and then kind of over. And I was waiting for that moment for the guys to get right there so I could snap a picture and scream, pivot!
you get to do
I did.
it.
It was great. I did, totally. And they're younger, so they're like, what? What are you talking about? I'll just
They're
send you the
probably
picture.
yelling.
Yeah, and I'll see if we can dig it up, and I'll superimpose it here on the podcast.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be awesome. Oh, God.
Oh, no. But no, but I think a lot, and I like that word pivot versus change. I'm never going to forget that now because I know before, let's back up to when COVID hit, because your industry is completely different than mine. And I'm in the bedding industry. And so, there was a moment there we thought that brick and mortar retail was really going to suffer. We didn't know how the economy would actually react because when it first came out, everything's shutting down. We're like, okay, we got to batten down the hatches. We got to, make preparations. This is what we've planned for. This is why we have a savings account. These are the things we've talked about, these drastic circumstances. And I remember a conversation where my husband and I we're comparing ourselves, and we specifically said, in order to thrive through this, we're going to need to be proactive and not reactive. What do we need to be doing right now that 6 months from now we'll look back and say we're glad we did that? But we don't know. Like, you can't tell the future. What do we need to be doing? And we took a lesson from Chick-fil-A, because the Chick-fil-A down the street from us is a big, nice volume location, very well run, as they all are, I'm pretty sure. And almost, I think actually overnight, I really truly think it was actually overnight that they converted their facility into a drive-through only touchless facility. Okay. Now, they really quickly found a way to continue to survive in the environment that we found ourselves in. So we were like, okay, what do we need to do to make a change that quickly? And so we changed our entire business model overnight to appointment only. We didn't know if that was the right idea to do or
Yeah.
not, but we just knew we couldn't shut the doors and go home and, sit and wait on the world to get better. We had to try something, and it worked phenomenally for us. Did you in your industry, and I realize I'm kind of changing a gear a little bit because nobody likes lingering on COVID, but the topic here is like being adaptable to what's going on. And sometimes the world around us changes quickly. In your business, did you find anything you had to adapt to quickly, whether it was COVID or any other point in time?
Yeah. First of all, kudos to you for being proactive and not reactive. That, to a psychologist's ears, that's like heaven, right? Like I'm like, yeah, proactive, not reactive, because it's huge, right? Because then you avoid, what happens when you're active and the huge emotional swings from it. So, when COVID hit, the problem was it shut down all in person, right? So our business, like halted, right? In terms of like you didn't know what to do, and the scary part, right, is you have people that you see who are highly anxious already, depressed, suicidal, have significant OCD, right? Aren't sleeping already, weren't sleeping, right? And now you bring on a pandemic, right, which does not help mental health ever, right? And then they add to that, and by the way, you can't see your provider, right? And so we had to very, very quickly pivot to telehealth. And I remember I had a stand. I just pulled a kitchen table out of, or my kitchen chair, and just put it against a wall because I didn't even know where to go in my house. And I just sort of put it against a wall and just clicked on like some platforms and started to do it. And we just really quickly had to go all telehealth. So in the history of our practice and in our profession, that wasn't a thing, right? Some areas could do it every now and then, but it wasn't known in our industry as something you did. And so in order to keep business going, we all had to shift to telehealth. And so, I have, my associates and trying to help them get up and running, and, how do we get these people, and what do we have to sign and to get them in, right? And plus you have populations who don't know how to use technology real well, right? And so helping guide them and bridge them. So it was a huge pivot for us, and thank God it worked out well. But who knew, right? Like it was not something, to your point when you said, I don't know if this is the right way to go or not. That this was the only way to go, right? Otherwise, people would not get care, and so you're abandoning people basically in the worst time.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, if you worked for, a major corporation or just an employer, forget major, because even our associates, our team members, we told them what to do. Like we said,
Yeah.
okay, go home. We're going to maintain payroll, but go home and take care of yourselves and your family. Isolate, do what you need to do. We will take care of the business. So, as the entrepreneur, as the business owner, you don't have someone calling you and saying, okay, here's how we're going to handle this, or stand by for further notice, with these meetings happening in boardrooms, happening somewhere else, deciding what's going to happen. You have to be the one to get creative. And
Yes.
the reason I mentioned COVID, even though it's a worn out subject and we hate, talking about it so much, is that's the world we live in. Things can happen that fast, whether
Yes.
it's a 9/11 type event or COVID or a good thing. I mean, good things can happen in the world too, but things can happen very quickly that force you to pivot. And I'm going to use that
Yeah.
word from now on. Thank you very much. I've just stolen that from you. But they
Good.
force you to pivot on a dime, and you got to be the one who's driving and figuring out which direction you're going.
Yeah. And I think it
Yeah.
ties back to what we said earlier too, which is sort of opening relationships versus closing them, right? Like all of our patients and all the corporations we worked with, we built these relationships. We had these open, they trusted us, they knew us, right? We were authentic with them in terms of, hey, we don't know how this is going to work. This is how we're going to try it. And just by
Mm-hmm.
being sort of human with them and having built a relationship of integrity with them, people are willing to try things with you because they know you have their best intentions at heart, right? So I think about it as like a piggy bank sort of idea. Somebody gave me this example once where, like, in a relationship, you have to be putting into this piggy bank before you take out of the piggy bank. And so by, following up with people through kindness, through authenticity, right? Through all these sort of things, through integrity, through good work, right? Through reliability, all of those things, consistency, you are putting into that piggy bank. So when you have to pivot and you say, hey, I'm going to have to take out of this a little bit. Like, I don't exactly know how we're going to do this. We're going to try it this way. My internet just went down. Let me try to call you. People, because you've put into that relationship, when you have to take out, people are absolutely willing to do that with you. But you have to make sure that in any relationship you're putting into it, or when you have to pivot as an organization and sort of take out, it's going to be a little bit more brittle.
What an excellent point, because that authenticity doesn't happen overnight. That's just a part of who you are. You can't fake that for the sake of growing a business and faking your way through trying to attain customers. You're not really making genuine deposits when it comes time to draw out of that piggy bank. There's nothing there because it wasn't real to start with. That you have to just be an authentic. And I love how our whole conversation is centering around being true to yourself, being true to the values you set. The integrity is an interwoven theme here. I'm loving all of this because I think that to grow a business that you actually feel good about, when you're not just growing it to fatten up a bottom line and to sell it. And there's a place for that too. I'm not knocking someone who has such a business sense that they can just grow a business and turn it into a highly successful and sell it. There's a place for that. That's just not who I am. And don't feel like that's who you are. So there's the realness, the authenticity, the real relationships that you build. It has to be. It can't be faked.
Mm-mm.
I love that point so much.
People smell like in authentic. Like, I think as people sort of we can sense that pretty easy, right? When somebody is just trying to feed us something to encourage us to either buy or encouraging us to do something or manipulate our actions in whatever way, right?
That's right.
I think people pick up on that a lot quicker than I think some people think.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I know that a lot of our listeners are going to really want to talk about sleep, because everybody on the planet has to sleep, and we're passionate about sleep. I'm in the sleep industry with mattresses, but you're completely on the other side. And one thing that we talk about a lot in the mattress business is that people don't want to come shop for mattresses. It's not a fun thing to do, and we understand that. We understand all the reasons why. But if we can tap into the passion about sleep, like who doesn't love sleep? Nobody wants to be woke up at 3 a.m. by, an alarm going off and you can't go back to sleep. We're grumpy, we're grouchy. Like, we need to tap into that emotion. But there are so many tie-ins between successful, entrepreneurship, being a good employee, all of these things, and sleep. I'm just going to give the platform to you, and you start wherever you want to within that realm, because there's so much we can unpack.
Yeah. Well, sleep is my jam. Like, you get me started. I love sleep. So early on in this journey, sort of the reason I got into sleep was just as a part of my private practice. People were just struggling. And when we asked them symptoms, whether it's their anxiety, depression, burnout, identity issues, I work with high-level CEOs who really couldn't control their thinking, were not sleeping. They were taking tons of over-the-counter meds to try to sleep at night, sort of lost sense of their identity, just so many things. And sleep kept popping up. And so I originally just went back to help my patients sleep better, and then bring that to my practice to help sort of my colleagues understand sleep so that their patients could sleep better as well. And there was this Desmond Tutu quote that said, as opposed to going to the river and pulling people out, why don't we figure out why they're falling in the first place? And it just clicked. Right. It was the moment that drift clicked for me in terms of they're falling in because of sleep. And
let's
organizations and companies, yeah. And people didn't know this, right? The people spend their days at work the majority of the time. And really what people don't understand is that sleep is a daytime issue. And if we're not doing things during our day to fill, I have this sleep balloon idea that anybody who knows me, I talk about this balloon all the time, but without getting into the details of the chemicals, you just have to be doing things during the day to fill that sleep balloon so that at night you can use those sleep chemicals to sleep, you fill it up during the day. And what's happening is that people focus on the last quarter of the game, if you will, right? Like, let me do the bedtime routine, and all that is important. But if you're not playing the first 3 quarters of the game, you won't win, period. If you're not doing the things you have to be doing during the day, it's a chemical process. There's no magic to it. And so I really was on a mission to help organizations look and help their people sleep because of the cost. And so you have 7.2 to 7.4 hours of lost productivity a week per person with poor sleep. 49% turnover rates for fair and poor sleepers because of stress and burnout and that. You have 85% increase in insurance costs for, individuals with insomnia. So companies keep taking these hits, and I wanted to find a way to help as many people as possible and help companies understand you are spending so much money by your individuals not sleeping. And so my mission has really become educating people on that balloon and how do we get you doing things during the day so that at night you can sleep.
Those are staggering statistics. When you really think about that, I know we've all been in the situation where we've driven, from point A to point B, and we get there and we don't really remember the trip. We've all suffered. If you've seen Office Space, when he goes into work and he just kind of sits there and he spazzes out for an first hour, and then he takes the first, like, he ends up getting like a total of, he says, like 5 minutes work done during the day, and he doesn't blame it on sleep, but it's just because he's just burnt out. And how many of us can relate to that? So what are some, let's go first of all from an individual standpoint. And I know that you offer a course that really helps dive deep into that. So if someone has really severe sleep issues, insomnia, you have the ability to help with that. But just from a top level, a couple of bullet points. What are some things that people who are not sleeping well, who are like working all day, like you say, what are some practical things just as a first tips they might look at?
So it's interesting when I had met you at your conference, Kelly, and it was like everybody in the mattress industry, right? And the thing that I heard constantly was, we don't sleep. Right? Like it was earth shattering. Like I honestly don't think of all those people, anybody came up to me and was like, you know what? Like, and if they said they slept well, the next thing was my spouse doesn't sleep well, or my kids don't sleep well, or, and so it's so rampant. And I always say a sleep issue is just one step away from you. If it's not you having the issue, you're one step away from it. Somewhere in that circle is somebody who has it. And so I tell people that if you look at your days and you look at one of my biggest tricks, tips, whatever you want to call it, is sunlight. Sunlight is huge. The more we build sensory stimulation, those chemicals and that balloon fills when we are stimulating our senses. So the moment you get up, open those blinds, get sunlight in. There's a very deep part in our brain that its job, one of its main jobs, is to ignite within your system, like, oh, it must be time for us to wake up. Because at the end of the day, we're all animals, whether we want to admit it or not, right? And so we have
physiology involved there.
100%. And so, it's that idea of how do we get out and stimulate these senses? So you got 5 senses, right? I had a little kid teach me this, right? What do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? And what do you touch? I'll never forget it. They were like 7. I'm like, you're brilliant. And so literally, if your focus can just be on those senses, you will make night and day progress on sleep. So when are you getting sunlight? When are you moving, right? Stand up. You don't have to go out for a run. You could also just stand up and stretch or move or change your eye gaze, right? Any of that sort of stuff. Have an ice cold drink, right? Watch if it's caffeine, but like have, an ice cold sort of drink, right? Stimulate those senses, right? Mints, things that are going to like stimulate a sense. So if you just think about it from like, am I stimulating my senses? And when we're sitting here, and COVID did not help with this, right? Because when we're sitting here Zooming everything, right? I'm not moving, I'm staring at a screen, right? And so those sleep chemicals get hit hard. I'm not walking back and forth to the bathroom maybe like I used to be, or I'm not having a conversation as much as I used to be with my colleagues, or all of those sort of things. So really, tips and tricks is that sensory component. Really identify what you're doing with light. Get up, don't get in your own way and close the shades or hit snooze or any of that. And just really build those senses.
It's excellent points. So with so much technology, there's so many sleep tracking devices out there too. And I'm sure some are more accurate than others. I'm not asking for an endorsement, but just as a general rule, because my husband and I got these Aura rings and we've been loving them. And I don't know how accurate it is, but I will say what I feel like the benefit is that now I'm paying attention to certain areas. It's on my mind because we have these little contests going with our readiness and our sleep scores and our activity scores. So how accurate the scores are is not the point. For me, it's like I'm paying attention to something that I wasn't before. Is that something you think could be valuable for somebody to kind of look into?
It's a great question. The sleep trackers are can be sometimes the bane of my existence. When you when used the way you're using it, if I could just applaud you and just hug you from afar right now, I would. Right? That is the way those trackers can be useful. Right? Is when they're reminding you of the things that are going to help you sleep at night. Right? And so even some of them will track making sure you're getting hydration. Are you drinking water? Right? Like, are we winding down? Right? Any of those sort of things. Like, when did you get into bed? And all of that is very useful information. However, more often than not, and I see this in entrepreneurs, right? We love control. We love
Mm-hmm.
control. And when it comes to sleep, it is the antithesis of sleep, right? Like, control and sleep do not go well together. The more we try to control it, the more it's like trying to grab a cloud. And so sometimes those sleep
Yes.
trackers,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
like, okay, well, this score was this, and this score is not this, and it actually makes them more anxious, and then they can't sleep as well at night. That we actually find that if you didn't have the numbers and focus on it, then you actually sleep better. So if any of these trackers are being used to bring awareness to sleep, I'm all for it. If we're using them to track how much time we have in everything, can I get more REM? I 12 minutes of REM here. I want 14 minutes of REM. How do we see an increased anxiety, which then tends to decrease sleep.
Wow. Double-edged sword then. So you probably have a little bit of self-analysis involved to know how are you going to treat the data. Are you going to obsess over it, or are you going to use it as a motivation and some more general use? Sounds
Yes.
like that's really
And
valuable
we sort of
advice.
outsource our own like perception of how we're doing. So a lot of times too, I had one individual who I was doing sleep coaching with, and their whichever sleep product they had told them that they had a poor night's sleep. And so I told them like they didn't get like REM was off and whatever. And so we were looking at, she had the data pulled up, and she was like, that's why I'm exhausted, right? I just, today is just going to be a bad day. Like, I'm just, this is going to be a rough one, whatever it is. So whatever happened, they had to reboot, like something happened, and then they had to reboot the data or whatever it was. And it was an error in the data. And like, she actually got pretty decent like sleep scores that night. And
Uh-huh.
like, she was like, oh my God, like I feel great. Like, I had a
I
good
feel
night.
better.
I was, oh my God, like, you realize, like, 2 minutes ago, right? You were just preparing for the worst day ever because of how exhausted you felt. And sometimes the power of suggestion of these tools too is
Yes.
more important than how we feel. Like, I would much rather have somebody tap into how they feel about their sleep and their fatigue and their wellness and their restedness than I would outsource that to an instrument.
Yeah, it's like calling in sick to work or something, and then you get to feeling better about 10 o'clock in the morning, but you feel like you got to be sick all day because it's a sick day. I'm sick today. I can't. Like, I'm over the headache now, and I'm feeling okay. I could have gone to work, but now I got to be sick. I'm sick today. So yeah, your
Yes.
mind was made up, and once that decision was made in the morning, today's a sick
Yes.
day. Can't be
Yes.
anything else.
Exactly.
But you're right.
Exactly.
The
So
power of
that's
suggestion. We've talked a lot about the power of speaking things, but the suggestion kind of plays into that. I think that can apply with anything, whether you're talking about your goals, speaking them out loud, because now they're out there, then they're hanging out there for you to, you know, it's almost like things happen the way you said they were going to happen, and not because you have any special skill to predict the future. It's because once something is spoken, there's a subliminal thing going on, a subconscious need to follow the thing that you said.
yes.
Yeah, powerful
Yeah.
stuff. From an employer standpoint, so I have a small team that works with me, but you work with some big corporations. You've worked with some massive corporations like Walmart. You've got a very impressive resume. So how are you finding their response to training on, well, first of all, how do you partner with them to help them solve this sleep problem in the organization, and then kind of what's their response to it?
Typically, right? It is industry specific, and it's absolutely not industry specific, meaning, right? You will have a company who will be, let's say, a tax and accounting firm, right? Who they know during a certain stage they see errors starting because it's right, during tax season, and they're stressed and they're overwhelmed, right? And then, we'll have a conversation about, how much does an error cost you, right? Like when you all make an error, how much does it then cost you to take care of that error, right? We know that people make more errors when they don't sleep. And once they start sort of crunching the numbers of like, oh, wow, when our accountant messes this up, right? And these are sort of big firms, right? There's a lot of money lost in that. When I consult with law firms, right? It's the same and it's different, right? It's like, how much does it cost when your attorneys lose 2 to 7.4 hours a week? So take that, multiply that by whatever the lawyer's hourly rate is, and that's how much you lose, right? We know that sales significantly decrease when people are sleep deprived, right? So having organizations or companies just look at their own numbers and say, okay, so if your salesmen are selling 30% less of X because of poor sleep, how much are you losing in revenue? And so you don't even necessarily have to sell them, because once they look at the numbers, they get it. They understand, like it's not a little like, oh, it's okay, right? We have trucking sort of companies and things like that, right? How much does that cost when a driver falls asleep at the wheel and kills a family, right? How much does that cost, right? And so organizations now are really starting to see the cost of it. And I think too, which I'm very blessed and grateful for, they're also seeing the desire in putting into the wellness of people, right? And Harry Roberts is an amazing dude, and we've talked before about, right, how do you make better people, right? Like, how do you make people better, right? And people feel better when they sleep better. And it's true, right, that we feel better when we sleep better. I parent better, and I am more patient with my kids when I sleep better. And then they go to school and maybe they have a better day because I wasn't nagging at them, right, from the morning, right? And then do they say something kind to a friend at school because I wasn't nagging? They slept better, they were good, and now they show kindness. And is this a kid who then, we never know the ripple effect of sleep. And so the more individuals and the more organizations and people that can focus on it, the ripple effect is huge, and people just feel so much better when they sleep. And the costs of not having it are immense.
Wow, it's just science. It's just science, really, because our bodies were designed to get a certain amount of sleep. Sleep has cycles, as you know. I'm certified sleep science coach, but not nearly on your level, just enough to get a little bit of education and kind of speak a little bit of the jargon. But to know, like, our bodies were designed to work efficiently. It's like, your automobile. It was designed by the manufacturer to work efficiently under a certain set of circumstances.
Yes.
So there's certain maintenance that's required. There's certain conditions that you drive within, or that you take care of your vehicle within those parameters, and it will operate optimally.
Yes.
And sleep is one of those for us. It's one of those daily maintenance things that we need. Otherwise, other things start breaking. Our weight, our anxiety, our metabolism. I mean, you could probably name so many things. You said something at Sleep Summit when I heard you speak that spoke to me, and I've heard several people express that they appreciated it. But you talked about how anxiety and excitement are the same chemical reaction in the brain. And so, and I was kind of changing the subject a little bit, but it just hit me when I'm talking about, anxiety being sleep related. So sometimes lack of sleep can cause anxiety, but talk a little bit about that emotion, because I know we're just living in a world that's full of anxiety. Everybody's anxious about something. So how can we manage that a little bit? Obviously through some sleep, but also can we, harness that and turn it into a little bit of excitement, some of just natural anxiety?
Yeah. So within our system, right, we have sort of, if you think of fight or flight and you think of those sort of things, right, we have what we call parasympathetic, sympathetic system. Basically, these are systems that work in tandem, right, to keep us at the most homeostatic rate they can, right? We want to stay like this, right? Like, just like we talked about change, like our bodies don't like it a whole lot either, right? They'll fight us for it. They want to do the least work possible. So when certain hormones and certain chemicals are released when you're anxious, they can look very similar to the same sort of hormones and chemicals that are released when anxious, excited. You would look at it and go, like they're running the same way. Like which one is it? And it becomes incredibly important to tell yourself which one it is. So if, let's say you have let's say you have you're opening up a new store, right? And you're just, there's some anxiety because it's, is it whatever, is it going to be the success we want it to be? Are we going to have the people we want to be running it? Is this what we should be doing? Whatever it is, right? Is there anxiety in that? Yes. And we forget to go, and there's some excitement in it too. Like, we're opening a new store, right? Like, we are doing something cool. Like we are doing something that, could potentially, right, lead to more change and more success and more growth and help us live more of our values. But we tend to stay within the anxious realm a lot of the time. So really to say to yourself, like, and I'm also excited for this, right? So and it doesn't even matter what it is. You can use this with your kids. You can use it with yourself as entrepreneurs, right? Are you going to go, whatever, let's say you have a test at school. You might just be excited that after today, it's over, right? Like, I'm just excited that after today, I won't even have to study for this test, right? Great, perfect. So really, sometimes you have to tell your brain, like, no, we're excited. You go for a job interview. Am I anxious? Yes. And this could be exciting. And as an entrepreneur, a lot of those are really hand in hand. We can be excited about the same stuff we're nervous about, and we just don't focus on it. We focus on the anxiety and the nerves and the fear, and we absolutely forget to focus on the excitement, what could come from it, and we tend to sort of stay in the realm of sort of fear, which doesn't help any of us grow.
And I think that goes hand in hand with just entrepreneurship because of all the fears involved. Like you said, there's so many circumstances where we really are feeling both.
Yes.
Times are slow, but sales are a little bit down, so we're anxious about it. But then there's the excitement of trying new things and figuring out how to jump the obstacle, because those times are going to happen. As a
Yes.
business owner, they just are. Um,
Yes.
so I could talk to you all day. You have so much wisdom to share, so much information. It's like I'm drinking from a fire hose over here. I just want to absorb everything, and I want to be taking notes, but I want to be watching. So I can't wait to go back and listen to this myself because I want to reabsorb everything we've talked about. But what an honor to have you on today. And anybody listening wants to check it out, Doctor, your website, tell everybody, I know it's driftcourse.com, but tell everybody kind of what you offer there. What are some services they can find? How can they contact you?
Yeah. First of all, thank you just for having me on here. And I'm so grateful. We got to share a table, and that was our first time sort of meeting at dinner. And I'm just grateful for you and to know more about you, and for you to stand in your authenticity and then allow other people as well. So thank you for having me on. I am super grateful. So website is driftcourse.com. And so there's a course that we spoke about. So certain organizations use that as part of their wellness platform. And so they bring it into the platform, and individuals can take Drift. It's also available for individual purpose, or for individual, growth, and individuals who are struggling with it. I also do consulting with organizations, and I go in and I help train organizations on how to maximize sleep for their employees, and do sort of group cohorts and individual coaching on sleep as well. So all things sleep, basically, and happy to answer any questions people have. And I just love bringing awareness to it. And to your point with the tracker, just the more we talk about it, and I'm grateful that you got certified, like learning about sleep. And I just think the more we can learn about it and just put it out there, the better for everybody.
Yeah, I agree completely. And the reason for the certification, and we actually had all of our store managers do it as well. We're not going to be opening, any coaching sessions here in the store, but we want to understand sleep as much as possible so we can help the guests who are in our store, because when they come in, they're experiencing a sleep issue. The vast
Yes.
majority of time, that's what brings them in. And if we don't speak the science of sleep and we don't fully understand it ourselves, we are not well equipped to help them with that problem, because it's not about selling them a mattress. It's about helping improve their lives, change their lives even through better sleep. So that's the
And
reason
how to
for
have the questions too, right? Like, so I'm blessed that sort of one of the ventures that Drift is onto is we created a sleep and wellness institute to help individuals learn this, because it's not only the content, right? Because the content is super important, but it's how do you make it relatable to the people you're selling to, right? Because we can know all about REM, we can know all about non-REM, we can know all about deep sleep. And if somebody comes in and you ask them a question about how they sleep, you better be able to have a very human response to that, right? That
Yep,
shows that you know a little bit about science without losing him, and like how is your REM, how is your
exactly,
non-REM, and all
exactly.
those sort of things. And so sometimes people just are anxious to ask people about sleep, because if somebody says I don't sleep well, we're like, I don't know what to do with that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Here, try
okay, I'm
this
sorry.
mattress. Is that one better? I don't know.
Right. Yes. So, and again, it's sort of that idea of, I will die on the sword, if you will, of that daytime issue component, right? And drift is really about that idea of let's really master the, 3 quarters of the game. That last quarter we need equally as important, in terms of understanding sort of the mattresses and the positions and all that. And once you put it all together, that's where the magic is. That's where sleep is you've now played all 4 quarters, and that's when you sleep well.
Gosh, I love that so much because we all know don't eat right before bed, don't drink right before bed, turn the devices off. We know all these things, but that's the fourth quarter stuff, and that's
Yeah.
only a fraction of the game.
Yes.
So thank you for
Yep.
putting that into perspective and for giving your time this afternoon. What a great conversation. I wish I could talk to you all afternoon, but I'll get to see you next week at our dream camp, and look forward to talking to you a little more there. And hope you can help some more organizations in their quest to sleep better and help their associates so they're focusing on their health and their better sleep. Thank you again for being
Thank you.
here.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.